you. Thank you very much. This is nice. Very nice. That was an old standard entitled I Hear a Rhapsody. I'm not sure who wrote that. Do you know?
Gershwin, yeah, that sounds right.
Gershwin? Really? Okay. We're going to go to a different country right now. We're going to go to Brazil and play a composition by Antonio Carlos Jobim. And this is called O Grande Amor, which means the great amor. think that probably some of you hear me and hear some of Stan Getz in my playing, and that's because I spent a lot of time listening to Stan Getz, not to copy Stan Getz. I never wanted to do that with anybody, but he was the first guy I think that came along in my life, you know, when I was 11, 12 years old. It was the first time I got exposed to him. It was when the Bossa Nova first came out in 1962. He had a record called Jazz Samba with Charlie Bird, and my sister is a little older than I am, and she was living in New York, and I was down in North Miami with my parents, had moved down there, and she sent me this record, and I just remember that hearing that record kind of changed my thoughts about the way that the tenor saxophone could sound, not necessarily should sound, but could sound. That there was so much beauty and passion in his playing that those were two of the things that really got to me as a musician. I had already listened to Coltrane and Sonny Rollins and Johnny Griffin and guys like that, and I love those guys, still do, you know. And so what happened was that I spent some time listening to Stan. I also got a chance to meet him at a very, very young age, and that had quite an impression on me too, because when I met him, he was in a dressing room backstage at the North Miami Beach Auditorium, and he was chug-a-lugging a bottle of vodka. My dad had brought me back there to get an autograph. It was one of those things. The Bossa Nova was just coming out, and it hadn't really hit the way that it was going to. And so the crowd, it wasn't a great crowd size-wise and everything. So in between shows, my dad took me backstage. And actually, my father tuned the piano for the concert that night, so that they gave him free tickets and stuff. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't have known that he was there. It wasn't advertised very well. So anyway, I got to meet him then, and I got to meet him a couple of years later. And before long, whenever he came down to Miami, I would always make sure that I'd get out to see him wherever he was playing, even if I was underage. And we became friends, and it lasted up until his passing in 1991. So I saw the Stan Getz that was, he was once described as a nice bunch of guys by saxophonist Zoot Sims, meaning that he had multiple personalities. And when either drugs or alcohol was in the mix, he could be very mercurial in his temper and the way that he dealt with people. I fortunately never witnessed the bad part as far as our relationship was concerned. So my memories are all really, really good and happy memories, because I learned a lot from him. As a matter of fact, Mark, I used to take him to the Otto Link factory in Pompano Beach when, Otto was still alive. It was right before he retired and sold the business to a guy named Ben Harrod. And Ben Harrod had it for, I don't know, must have been about 10 years or so. So whenever Stan came to town, the first thing we did was, Pompano was about 90 minutes away. So we'd pop on up there, and we'd go through all these mouthpieces. He'd come back with a bag full. Ben just gave him the mouthpieces and stuff. And
What'd you get for that bag today, man?
well, you know that probably about 4 or 5 years before it passed, I called it because my original vintage Link really was starting to wear, and I could not find another one that played anything like it. So I called him. I said, Stan, do you have any of those mouthpieces laying around? And he said, oh man, no, I think I left them in the hotel room. So the maid wound up with it, which was great because then she had doorstops for every room. I'm sure that's what she was thinking. But anyway, Yeah, it was a very interesting time in my life, and of course I idolized him, so those were very, very special times. But to me, he brought a beauty to music that I hadn't really been hearing. I think maybe occasionally when Miles would play ballads and stuff like that, you would hear that that sound, that thing that kind of connected with people. And I think that Stan really had that. I learned other things from other players. I listened to everybody. I tried to listen to everybody. Even if I didn't like them, I listened to them because I could learn from that, too. Even the guys that I didn't care for, I said, "Look, I don't want to sound like that, and I don't want to do that, and I don't want to do that, But I took all of these influences, Stan and Sonny Rollins and Coltrane, and like I said, Johnny Griffin and Hank Mobley, all the different saxophone players that are around. And I went back to Coleman Hawkins and Lester Young and Ben Webster, and I figured that any young saxophonist out there who is really interested in playing the saxophone should really explore the history of the instrument, because there is so much in the last 100 years that has happened to the evolution of the saxophone. And now we're in that place where we've got like a synergy going. There's all these styles and everything that you can mix up and put together, and if you do it long enough, eventually you're going to try and come out with your own voice, something that sounds, like you. I mean, I could always tell, Paul Gonsalves from Ben Webster, and I could always tell Johnny Griffin from Eddie Lockjaw Davis, and I could always tell Charlie Rouse from, whoever it was. I'm just saying on and on and on. But, usually if I heard a bar or two notes of somebody, I could go, I know who that is. I used to win radio station. There was this radio station in Miami that used to do a blindfold test every Friday night. And I would win it virtually almost every week. And I get, what I do, I wasn't driving yet. I mean, I was still like 13, 14 years old. I'd get on a bus and I'd drive to downtown Miami to this guy's record store to pick out my free record and stuff. So I was kind of a recordaholic. All my spare money, my allowance, money, all of that stuff went for recordings. I started working professionally when I was 14 years old with a bunch of guys that were maybe 2-3 years older than I was, and started playing dances and weddings and proms and all that kind of stuff. And we even had beetle wigs and all of that. I could use that now. But, I mean, that was it. You learned how to play music, you learned tunes. And, when I figured out that, boy, I could make money doing this too, that was like icing on the cake. That was it for me. I'm one of those people that never had a second thought about being a musician as a vocation. I never thought, oh, I need something to fall back on. I never felt like, what if I don't make it or anything? I just went straight ahead. I worked hard. I went to school. Any playing opportunity that came up, I was there. I would go into some of the worst neighborhoods just to be able to sit in with some older guys, and get that kind of what's the word? Experience. I didn't care where it was. I didn't care if you were Chinese or black or Asian or, it didn't matter. Wherever the music was, that's where I wanted to go. And I started sitting in with a guy named Ira Sullivan. You guys, anybody know that name, Ira Sullivan? He's probably more of a Miami guru than any place else, but he was from Chicago. And he played with Charlie Parker, and he played with just about everybody. He played with Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers in the late 50s. He played with Horace Silver for a time. But he was one of those guys that didn't want to go on the road. He had a family, his wife, and they're like guys like Von Freeman, were like that in Chicago, if you know that name, Von Freeman. You know, Von had a family and stuff. He wasn't interested in, you know, just going all over the place. So Ira was like that, and I was very fortunate that I hooked up with him, and he started inviting me to come and sit in with him when I was like 16 years old. You know, they used to sneak me in the back of the club, you know, with the Coke, and came the last set, you know, Ira would say, come on up, you know, and I'd get my horn and, you know, and then wind up stepping on you know what. But I learned, it was a learning experience. I learned, you know, how to play tunes and how to, you know, take a licking and, you know, go home and work on it and come back and try and make something else happen. So, you know, also great experiences. So I just wanted to relate that to you about the whole Stan Getz thing. All right, we're going to do Jitterbug, Wallace. Okay, it's in there if you need it. Okay, you know the front? Okay, then we'll just set up a good. Huh?
I could do that.
No, that's all right. Let's just set up a good.
Are we in three flats?
Three flats. A 1, 2, 3, 3. Fats Waller's Jitterbug Waltz. I think we're going to, I think we'll play a ballad right now. Is that okay with you guys? Okay. Should have soft lights. Where are the candles, Mark? And the waitresses with the bunny tails? Woo!
Those romantic fluorescent lights.
So, I thought maybe what we would do right now is, this is supposed to have some educational value, and we're all educated people. So, I don't know, I think maybe I'll start with a little bit of my background and stuff, and maybe that'll give you some ideas about questions that you might have for me. My father was a professional musician. He was a drummer and he was a vibraphone player. And he actually worked with Benny Goodman for a short time back in the late 40s. He subbed for, I think it was Mousy Alexander or somebody like that, at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York. But he didn't do the music thing completely, just that. He was a piano technician. He had perfect pitch, which he did not bless me with. Damn. And so I'm doing the best I can. I know. But he played vibraphone too, and he also played some piano. And so for a lot of years, when I first started playing the clarinet, which is what I started on, back in those days, that was the natural evolution. You started on the clarinet because basically it was the hardest one of them all. And if you could play the clarinet after a couple of years, then you graduated to the saxophone. And then somewhere down the line, you added the flute to the mix, so that you could be what we call a doubling musician. And in theater work, in the entertainment business, we're not just talking about jazz, but like I said, I worked in many house bands back in the late '60s on Miami Beach, backing up people like Tony Bennett, Peggy Lee, lots of comedians, Bob Hope, Bill Cosby, excuse me. Just all kinds of different acts, and all the Motown acts, the Four Tops, the Temptations, whatever it was. So you needed to be able to double back in that day. So I was very happy that I had the clarinet. And then I started the saxophone when I was about 11. I finally bugged my father. I said, it's time, because all the music that I was listening to, I was going from listening to Benny Goodman and Artie Shaw records, which was fantastic, and that's where I first started to play along with records, and try and cop as much stuff as I could off the recordings, licks. I'd play along, I'd find the key centers. When the piano player was playing, I'd play my solo, whenever I could fit something in. And that's really where I first started to learn how to play jazz, And I think that that's the very first step in the evolution of learning how to play jazz, is that you got to learn how to imitate. It's really, really important, because if you don't listen to people who play that kind of music, there's no way that you're ever going to authentically be able to play like that. So I did that. I was very lucky. I had really good teachers. I learned the proper way. I didn't develop too many bad habits that I had to undo later on. I got an alto saxophone first, and because I'm such a big guy. But the alto wasn't, it was nice and everything, but there was something wrong. Something wasn't right. And I figured out, of course, that, it was the tenor that that was what I was hearing in my head, because my favorite players were the tenor players. I mean, I love Bird, I love Cannonball, I love Phil Woods, all those guys, but I was really into the tenor saxophone. So I finally talked to him about 6 months to a year later. We traded in that nice shiny alto saxophone, and I got a nice old funky Con 10M. So that was my first tenor. And I played that for a few years, and I don't know if any of you guys still read Downbeat magazine? Anybody know, you young guys know what Downbeat magazine is? Okay, well, Downbeat Magazine is a magazine that's been in print for 80-something years. And it's, it was all the latest news about, all the jazz artists, who they were playing with, new recordings coming out. Well, Selmer saxophones always had the back cover, at least from the 50s on. I saw an issue upstairs where they had Khan on the back cover from 1946. Yeah, and yeah, if you ever get a chance, you should check this place out. Holy cow. The museum is just absolutely amazing. Anyway, so I knew because all of my heroes, played Selmers. They all played Selmer saxophones. And I knew that somewhere down the line I was going to get a Selmer saxophone. That was my dream. And so I tore the back cover off of the Downbeat magazine. I started subscribing when I was 13 to Downbeat magazine. They owe me a t-shirt or something. And I hung that picture up on the wall and, in my room. And, every day I would look at that picture and go, someday, someday, someday. Well, about the time I turned 15, I had earned some money, and my father decided that I was pretty serious about this music thing. And because he always told me, music is it's a great sideline. It's a great sideline. You don't want to do it for a living. It's just, it's hard and everything. And I didn't give, two poops about that. I just, I just wanted to play. So anyway, he had my old teacher in New York go and pick out Selmer Mark VI for me at Sam Ash Music. I got that instrument, and it was like being reborn or something, because it was just so special, and the sound of it was gorgeous, and it felt so much better than my Con did, and all of those kind of things. And it was shiny, it was beautiful, and so I played that, and I played that instrument for quite a number of years. It's still around, it's still being used. The guy that took my place on Maynard Ferguson's band, I sold it to him when we were still in college, and he's still playing it today, so I know it's still safe. Even if it wasn't Katrina, it didn't get damaged. But I started, like I said, working with bands and everything when I was in high school. By the time I was starting college, I was starting to get work on Miami Beach with the old guys, and I was always the youngest guy on the band, always the youngest guy on the band, and the guys took a liking to me. I wasn't a pain in the ass. I did what I was told. I was respectful. If they said wear a long tie with your tuxedo, I wore a long tie with my tuxedo. Sometimes guys get kind of weird about stuff like that, and they don't get with the program, so to speak. And that's a good way to not get called back. So and I was getting better all the time. And so a lot of the times on the acts, whether it was Sammy Davis Jr. or Ann Margaret or, I can't even remember, Engelbert Humperdinck, Tom Jones, the whole thing. I started a list years ago of all the people that I had worked with over the years, and it was ridiculous. There was probably about 1,000 names on there. See, where was I going with this? So, it was always like we'd play a couple of tunes, to warm up the audience before the main act came out. And, it'd always be some of these Sammy Nestico charts, something that was swinging, kind of like a bassy kind of thing. And, and the leader would point to me, and I'd get up and play, "Come on, Junior," and I'd play, and he'd go, "Take another one, Junior," and I'd wind up doing that. And so, I was feeling pretty good about myself. First of all, I was working in an adult world, even though I was still a kid. And it was amazing that I was working with all the people that I was working with. So I went to school at the University of Miami, and when I got to school, there were some pretty heavy duty guys there that were older than me. Some had come over with Jerry Coker. If you guys don't know that name, Jerry Coker is one of the pioneers in jazz education. He started at Indiana University before David Baker, and then he moved to the University of Miami and started the jazz program the year before I came there. And I found out that there was an awful lot of stuff that I needed to get together that I didn't have to get, that I didn't have together. And so I really started working my ass off. And I started not playing just by ear anymore. I learned about theory and harmony, and of course, which made me a much better musician, much more experienced kind of player. And I always had my own groups going on. I would find little clubs to play in. I was kind of like Adam in that way, and that I was hustling. I was making a good living working on Miami Beach, but I wanted to play jazz. So I started pursuing that more and more. I started working a little bit with Ira Sullivan and a young bass player by the name of Jaco Pastorius. You guys know that name? And got to hang with him and Ira, and we became good friends. And then I got a call after I got my master's degree in 1975, literally 2 weeks after I got my degree, because I was just going to go on doing what I was doing. I was going to work the shows and the jazz gigs, and by then the recording business was starting to get pretty good, and I was in a horn section, and we backed up people like Dr. John and Bill Wyman from the Rolling Stones and the Bee Gees and all of these rock and pop acts and everything. So that was really cool. So I got my master's degree, and 2 weeks later I get a call from Maynard Ferguson's office, and the lady on the phone says, "Yeah, we'd like to ask you if you'd like to join the band." And at that particular time, my taste was a little bit different. I was into Wayne Shorter, and I was into Joe Henderson, and I was into, Maynard Ferguson. I knew he made MacArthur Park and Chameleon and all that kind of stuff. And the situation was, she called me on a Sunday night, and she says, "We need you in New York on Tuesday." So I'm thinking to myself, how the hell am I going to do that? And get rid of, the gigs that I have, and what if this doesn't work out, and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I made the decision, I'm going to go ahead and do it. I'm going to take the gig, and if I really don't like it, I'll hand in my notice. And the tour, I believe, the first tour I did was about 2.5 months, so it was about 10 weeks. And I went to New York, and at this time it was kind of a new band, because the band that he had before was a band that he brought from Europe. A lot of European players and people from New Zealand. Baritone player was a guy named Bruce Johnston, who was a monster baritone player. And a lot of young guys. And I went to their rehearsal that first day, and it was like, holy it was amazing how good they sounded. So I get on the band. My first gig on the band, we was that Wednesday. We rehearsed on Tuesday. On Wednesday, we had another short rehearsal in the morning, and then we got on the bus and drove to Baltimore to play a club there. And that went really, really well. The next night, we went to Atlantic City and played at the Convention Center. And it was opposite Buddy Rich's band, and it was opposite Stan Kenton's band. It's my second day on the band. My third day on the band, we're playing the Newport Jazz Festival at Carnegie Hall. And Bill Watrous' big band, Manhattan Wildlife Refuge, For those of you who might remember it, the band only lasted a few years, but they opened for us, and playing Carnegie Hall on my third day on the band, and the Newport Jazz Festival was just absolutely incredible. So I was like a kid in a candy store. In so many ways, I was a kid in a candy store, and I got so into it, because a lot of the records that they put out were fairly commercial. They were trying to make what they called crossover music, where there are elements of rock and funk and all of that, and that was okay, but some of it was kind of campy a little bit. But he still had all the great music in the book, and he broke things up. He made sure we played the Micah Benny charts and the Willie Maiden charts, and who's the other guy? My mind, not Don Costa. Anyway, great writers, and we're playing all the bebop stuff, Slide Hampton charts and all of that. And like I said, I just had an absolutely wonderful time, and he was probably the best boss you could ever imagine. He treated us with respect, as long as we respected him and didn't do anything to put bad vibes on, what was going on. It was just an absolute ball. I wound up staying for 3 years on the band. I became music director, and we only had 3 saxophones in the section. It was just tenor, alto, and baritone. And so consequently, we all got to play like all the time. I was like a jack in the box. I haven't seen a jack in the box. We don't have them in Chicago, man. That doesn't mean I'm going to eat there, though. But, up and out of my chair playing a solo, have a ballad feature, have an up-tempo burner, have a funk tune, have a ballad, just, it showcased me in every way, and I started getting notices, and actually started placing in the Downbeat Readers Poll and the Critics Poll, and all of that. So it was a wonderful experience for me. After 3 years, though, living out of a suitcase on a bus, it gets a little old. And I had met my wife at the time, and we carried on like a long distance relationship for about a year before I finally said, it's time. So I handed in my notice, and it was a very difficult thing to do, and he wished me well, and he said, you know what, as long as you live, your name will always be associated with mine. And I said, that's damn fine with me, Maynard, And so consequently, over the years, I went back, many times to sub for somebody either who was sick or while they were in between finding somebody, so I'd go out for a few days here and I'd go out for a week here, from time to time. And it was always like I'd never left. It was like I, walked out to get a pack of cigarettes or something, So that relationship was a tremendous thing for me. That's what it was. The last time I was in St. Louis was 10 years ago when I played the Maynard tribute at the university. I forgot about that. So I did that. So when I gave my notices, we played at a place called the Robin Hood Dell, which is a big, huge outdoor park theater in Philadelphia. And there were 35,000 people there. George Benson was the other act besides us. So we were both at the height of our, of the band's popularity and stuff. So, it was crazy. But after I did that gig and said goodbye, I had to take the train back to New York to overdub some solos on the last record that I did, which was a record called New Vintage. I did 3 albums with him. And the producer, the guy who produced Maynard's, the 3 albums that I was on with him, was a guy named Bob James. You guys remember the show Taxi? He wrote the music for that. Anyway, wildly popular, first the CTI artist, and then with Columbia Records for a long time, and then later on with Warner Brothers. But Bob had produced those records, and he really liked me. And he said, someday we're gonna do a project together. So I went to do my overdubs and stuff and finished, and I get out of there, and word comes down from upstairs that, Bob James is in the studio upstairs working on his new album, and he'd love to see you. So I had time before I had to go catch my plane back to Miami. And I went up to see Bob and said hello and all that kind of stuff. And he said, Mark, I just want to let you know, I just signed this production deal with Columbia Records, and I want to sign you as a solo artist. And I said, okay. Like, holy shit, now I've got a recording contract with Columbia Records under my name. So I wound up doing two very expensive albums for Columbia Records, which, by the way, have just been issued on CD for the first time. You can get them at Amazon.com. It's two CDs on one CD. And they both sold very, very well at the time. And then I became a part of Bob's band, Bob James' band, which was great because now that I was married and had, kids and all that kind of stuff, I didn't want to go out on the road for long periods of time. So we'd go out for maybe 2 weeks at a time. I'd be home for a couple of months. Bob didn't want to be out on the road. He was so busy producing and all of that. So it was the perfect gig for me because it paid really good and it wasn't as time consuming, so I could do all my stuff, at home also. So that was great. And I wound up doing that for 6 years and worked with Bob. And just as that came to an end, 6 years was enough, I was tired of playing on 2-chord vamps and all that kind of stuff. It was a lot of fun. It really was, and great musicians, fantastic musicians, Steve Gadd, and just you name it. And I said, okay, it's time. I got a call from DePaul University in Chicago, and their jazz saxophone teacher had passed away. And they said, we're looking for somebody. Would you come very highly recommended? And I hadn't really thought about it because I really never thought about teaching. I was just playing my whole career. And I thought about it for a while, and I thought, well, maybe I should try this. Maybe it's something that I would really enjoy, and, I could make some decent bread and all of that. So I said, okay, I'll try it. So I think I started off with like 3 or 4 students, and one of them, by the way, Mark, was Paul Maslin.
Oh, sir.
He was my first student, yeah, and found out that, first of all, it made me go back and examine a lot of the things that I had gone through, to make sure that I was staying far enough ahead of the students so that they wouldn't get bored or, whatever. And I found after that first year that I really enjoyed doing it. And I felt that I had the right kind of skills to be able to do that. I felt that I could impart my passion for music, with these students, and I could turn them on to all kinds of things that they never would have got had they been left to their own devices. So I wound up doing that, and then I got involved with Selmer, it was Selmer then, before Con Selmer. They were separate companies until eventually Selmer bought Con, and whoever else became a big conglomerate. But I've been working for them, doing clinics and workshops for them since the middle '80s, and so having that picture on the wall of that Mark VI kind of paid off in a lot of different ways, because I always felt, and over the years I had every saxophone manufacturer that you can think of offered me an endorsement deal, to play their instruments and stuff. And let me try, and I try the horns and I go, this ain't it. This is not it. That one's not it. This one's not it. Nothing played like a Selmer Paris saxophone to me. So, including Mr. Craig Denny, who tried in the worst way to get me to come over to the other side. But anyway, I've been very happy with being a Selmer clinician, and I've been happy with their instruments. I finally switched from the Mark VI back in 2000 when the Reference saxophone, the new model, came out. And they had two. They had a 54 and one they called the 36. The 54 was this, in this brushed brass finish, and the 36 was a lacquered one, you know, a regular lacquered one. And I love the sound of this. It felt so even throughout throughout the entire horn. I didn't have to favor certain notes. You know, the A and the E and the D, they were all true, you know, notes. And I said, this is like the evolution. You know, this is what the Mark VI would have been had they just kept the name the Mark VI. You know, I still don't know why they have three different models, you know, Series 2, Series 3, and the Reference. You know, I wish they'd go back to one horn. But anyway, so ever since then, I've played this horn, and it's the best saxophone I've ever played in my life. So a lot of people say, well, Selmer's really expensive, and it is. It is. However, you know, when you think about making an investment, you know, in your career and something that, you know, you make money with, to me, it's better to spend a couple of extra $1,000 and get what you really want, because it will retain its value better. It'll still, you know, it will last lifetimes, where some of the newer saxophones, I truly don't believe that they will last for generations. So that's where I wound up. And then, anyway, that all kind of brings it up to date about where I am and what the things that I've gone through. So now I'd like to open it up for some questions and stuff that some of you might have about the music business, about school, about going to college, and majoring in music, you know, what it's like to be a professional musician, how to survive in the world.